Hello, everyone, and welcome to this walkthrough on setting up Kestra on GCP. Let's jump right in. So, if you want to follow along, of course, you can watch this video. But if you head on over to Kestra.io and just go to Docs, under Getting Started and Installation Guide, you'll find GCP VM with Cloud SQL and GCS, which is what we will be setting up. And here are the instructions if you want to follow at your own pace. All right, that being said, let's get to GCP. So I've set up a project called Kestra RDS-GCS. You can set up a new project, use an existing project. If you don't have a GCP account, you can sign up and you get $300 in free credits, which is way more than you'll need to follow along in this walkthrough. All right. So the first thing we need to do is to create a VM. But to make our lives a little bit easier, before we do that, let's generate an SSH key. And if you're not familiar with SSH keys, just follow along and you'll see their use in just a moment. So I just Googled GCP SSH keygen. And if you're on Linux or Mac, see if I can make that a little bigger. You've got the command right here. Windows, you'd want to use one of these. I'm just going to copy that. I have a VM here, and I can just paste that in. A few things we need to change is the username. I just always tend to use Gary. And just a name for the public and private key files to distinguish them. I'm going to do Kestra GCP. That's fine. I'm going to leave the passphrase blank. And now if I cd to my SSH directory, I see those there. And what I want is the public key, so I can just cat that out. And I'm going to copy all of that. And then back here, if I just search for metadata, compute engine, and I'm going to add an SSH key. And you can do this when you're creating your VM as well. Putting it here, any VM that you start is going to have this public key. So if that's not the behavior you want, you will want to add this key to the VM itself and not in the metadata. Go ahead and save that. And while that's saving, first step, we're going to want to create a VM. So if we go to Compute Engine, VM Instances, if this is your first time creating a VM in this project, you're probably going to need to enable the API, and then that'll take a few minutes and you'll get a screen like this eventually. And here we'll create an instance. In my case, I'm just going to call this Kestra. Seems to make sense. Leaving the region and zone default is fine. EC2. E2 medium is probably fine, but I always tend to use the 8 gig. I just find I run into less issues, but that's just personal choice. All right. Now, when we get down to boot disk, it defaults to Debian. We're going to want to change that to Ubuntu. And I want a little bit newer version, so I'm going to do 22.04. 10 gigs is probably fine. That's all good. We do want to allow HTTPS traffic because we are going to be eventually connecting to this VM from a web browser. And we can go ahead and let's look here. All right, that all looks good. And we can go ahead and create. And that'll take a few moments. Again, if this is your first time creating a VM in the project, you might also get a pop-up saying, hey, we need to text or email you an authentication code for you to put in. Go ahead and hit send, get that code, put it in, and again, you should be fine. While that's spinning up, I'm going to switch back to the documentation here, and I'm going to get rid of the join our community or star on GitHub. I would encourage you to do both. And these are the steps that we just went through. We created it. We allowed the HTTPS traffic. And next we're going to install Docker. And there's a link for the instructions here on how to do that. That's if you already had Docker installed. This is a fresh VM, so of course Docker is not installed, so we can keep going down and set up Docker's apt repository is where we will pick up. So let's see how our VM's doing. Okay, we've got an IP address, and we can test that by going back to where we generated the SSH key, and we just need to SSH the username we gave when we generated the key, and then the IP address. Yes to accept the fingerprint. Control L, and we can see we are now on the VM. And we can also double check that with if config. There we go. Oh, it looks like it's not installed. Well, we can ls. Notice there's nothing in here, and figure it's a clean VM. Okay. Now installing Docker. What I like to do is I like to just make an install file. Nano comes by default in Ubuntu, so we can just make a file called install Docker. And what we're going to do is get all of these commands here, copy them. All right. And that's going to add the repository. And these will actually install Docker. And let's see, we need the Linux post install steps. Pretty sure that when you install Docker and Docker Compose, it makes the Docker group, so we can skip that. This will add our user to the Docker group, and then we just need to refresh the group. All right, paste that in. One more. Control X to exit out. Just type Y, save modified buffer, and enter to keep the file name the same. We do need to modify the file to make it an executable. We do that with chmod plus X on Linux, and we'll call that install. Well, we'll run that on the file install Docker, so then we can // and just run it like that. And that will just take a moment. Okay, I did need to type capital Y to confirm at one point in the install, but that was relatively quick, and we can test that all installed okay with docker run hello -world. All right, and that's the behavior we want to see, showing us that Docker is in fact installed. As a short aside here, if you plan on playing around, breaking things, now might be a good time. You can come here and create a new machine image, and you could just call this Kestra Docker. Doesn't need to be lowercase, no spaces. That's where the image is going to be stored, kind of like a Google Cloud Storage bucket. You could choose the appropriate one and then create. I guess I could have skipped that, but then say you put this down for a while, want to come back, don't need to sit through the install again. Then when you go to Compute Engine, and if you wanted to create an instance, Rather than selecting everything and having to remember all that and install Docker, you could just select your image and then make a machine from that. But that is a little aside there. Nice little shortcut that I use quite a bit when playing with something new. Okay, let me switch back to the documentation. Uh, Installing Kestra. Okay, we'll set up the firewall here in a bit. All right, so to set up Kestra, we just need to go ahead and run this curl command. So here we are back on the VM. And Control L is a nice way to clear your terminal, if I didn't mention that already. And that was a very quick download because it's just a flat file. And there's our Kestra Docker Compose file. Okay. So something else that is going to come in handy, I'm going to open up a new terminal and change to my SSH directory, .ssh directory, I should say. And I'm just going to make a config file. And the host, that's going to be the nickname that my machine is going to know this by. And I guess Kestra GCP probably makes sense. We want to indent 4 spaces, I believe, and we want host name like that. And we will want the IP address of our VM. So switching back here, we can glance at that real quick. And this is a dynamic IP, so every time you shut down and bring your VM back up, it is most likely to change. So just be aware, you will also need to change your config file. And the user is the username we gave when creating the SSH keys, in my case, Gary. And then we just need the identity file, and tilde means the home directory, and it is my home directory in the .ssh directory, and we called this, actually, let me open up one more terminal. I forgot what we called it. I'm going to check real quick. Kestra GCP. So Kestra GCP, notice it's not the public key, so no .pub, and then just Control X, Y, and enter. All right, now with that, we should be able to open up Visual Studio Code. That bigger. And I already have the SSH extension installed on mine. If you do not, just click here for the extensions and look for SSH. Remote SSH, go ahead and install that. Once you do, and click these little greater than, less than, it's going to give you the option to connect to host. And I'm going to connect to Kestra GCP. And then we just need to open folder. We'll open the home folder here. And just yes to trust. Okay. So the gain here is Nano is great, but when you're dealing with longer files, at least in my opinion, it can be kind of unruly to scroll and find what you want to change. So this is just a nice way to connect to your VM and be able to edit all that good stuff. Okay, so back to the instructions. We want to change the basic authentication under Kestra. So Kestra server basic auth. So let's see if we can find that. And scroll down. Basic auth, we want to set that to Let me just Control Z. Yes, lowercase. True. Must be a valid email address. I'm going to use just an email address that I kind of use when doing demos like this. And let's see, we do need to set a password. In reality, you are very much going to want to change this to something more secure, unless you're tearing it down immediately. But even then, I don't know, 123. That is not great, but I'm going to go ahead and save that with Control S. You can tell when it's saved because notice I type something else. There's a white circle. When I Control S, it changes to an X. That has tripped me up many, many times, so just be aware of that. Okay. Next, we are going to set up the firewall rule that's going to block everything else from getting to this VM, except for our user interface port for Kestra. So switching back to our VM, if we go to network details and firewall, we're going to create a firewall rule, and we'll call this Kestra UI. Looks like I might still have one out there from when I ran through this before. The Kestra UI port ingress. No need for logs. Default network. Priority 1000. If you're doing this in production or for some other project, you'd probably want to tag your instance and then just do it for specific tags. But just for this, we can say all instances in the network. There's only the one at the moment. And we are going to allow 0.0.0.0 wax 0 in, which means any IP address, no matter what it is, this rule applies to it. If you want to be more specific, you could give your actual IP address, but that is determined by your internet service provider and can change. So not really a guarantee there. So again, not best practice, but for this demo, that's fine. And we're going to do TCP port 8080 and go ahead and create that rule. Okay. We already did this part just now. Launching Cloud SQL. Okay. So to do that, we just need to scroll down here to SQL and create instance. We want a PostgreSQL instance. Let's call this Kestra DB. Super password. Again, you'd want to actually create a secure password, but I will be tearing all of this down right after recording, so it doesn't really affect me so much. The default 15 at the time of this recording is fine. Enterprise, save yourself some money there. You can switch this to sandbox. Again, you can keep an eye on your price estimate up here and just kind of see what it might run you. A single zone is fine. And actually, if you wanted to minimize costs more, you could probably get away with one virtual CPU. Two virtual CPUs and 8 gigs, guaranteed to run well. Let's see here. Thought there was a place to change that to a spot instance, but I could have been mistaken. There you go. Shared core. Again, save you some money. Okay, so two other things here. Uh, Probably the most important out of the two is we're going to set up a private IP because Kestra, which is already in our project, uh, in a VPC on Google Cloud, is the only thing that needs to talk to this database. Nothing from the internet needs to. So we can just choose our default network. And it does require additional configuration. We just need to enable that API. There's no extra cost here. So what it's doing, and we can actually just use an automatically allocated IP range and create connection. So we have a subnet in our VPC. It's actually going to start a service in a different subnet, but it's going to set up VPC peering between those two subnets so they can communicate. But we can just kind of wave our hand at all of that and know by going through these options, these will be able to talk to each other, our VM and the database, and nothing from the outside world can talk to our database because it doesn't need to. And while that's going, can I do additional configuration? No, so we'll give that a moment here. Okay, and as that finished, it kind of disappeared, and that's fine. One last thing, data protection. So if you're planning to take this down right away, or it's the data that you're putting in is not going to be critical to you, you're going to want to uncheck this enable deletion protection. If when you go to tear it down at the end, you notice delete for your database is grayed out, don't panic. You just need to stop the database, click the three-dot ellipse, edit, come in here, uncheck this box, and save the changes. Then you'll be able to delete it. And we just need to create the instance. Again, that'll take a few minutes. Some of these will become ungrayed out once that's done. Okay, that finished. It did take a bit of time. I think maybe 6-7 minutes. I find that does vary a little bit, but we can pick up from here. Users, we just want to add a user account. We're just going to, well, in my case, Kestra. Again, for your own just kind of one-off project. That's fine. Anything kind of production-wise, definitely not good. And database, we'll just create a database. We'll just call this Kestra data. We'll go ahead and create that. And let's see if we switch back to the documentation here. Let's pick back up. We created a user. We created a database. Okay. So now we just need to update the Docker Compose file, which is where connecting with Visual Studio Code comes in handy. I'm going to use Control F. There we go. Guess I could have used that and made it a little more secure. And let's see, what does it want us to update it to here? We just paste it in here. And if we use Control square bracket, I guess facing to the right, the one on the right-hand side, we can kind of auto-indent that. And external endpoint, that's going to be the IP address of our database. And if we look here, it is 1059.64.3. And again, that's not a public IP address, but our VM will be able to get to it. And we called the database Kestra data. Let's look through here. Don't believe we need the Postgres service anymore. Yeah, we don't need that anymore. So let me go ahead and remove that. And then we will also get rid of depends on Postgres here at the end. And just kind of giving that a glance. Again, Control S, make sure that changes to an X so I don't lose any of that work. That all looks good. And I did put the username and password. There it is. Do not need the Postgres Docker service anymore, so we removed that. If we were already running it, we would need to restart it. Okay. And let's see. Now we need to create a service account. And it looks like we're going to create a bucket. We can go ahead and start by creating the service account. So let's just jump in there. And here, if we go down to IAM, we'll go to service accounts. That's our default service account. Looks like was used to start the VM. I'm going to create one here. Kestra. Let's just call this GCS for Google Cloud Storage. Put in a description if you'd like. For the role, we want, I always forget if it's Cloud Storage or Google Cloud Storage. There we go. And we'll just give it storage admin. And continue. And done. We can see here, Kestra GCS. Over here in the ellipse, we want to manage keys. We want to add a key and create a new key. And we want that to be JSON. Okay. So let's switch back to the documentation. And we added the new key. And then it wants us to cat out the key, but then run it through this JQ command. I'm on Linux Mint, so I don't think JQ is installed by default, but we'll find out in a moment. Sorry, I tried to make that bigger. And it jumped a bit. Okay. So we'll just take this command here. Copy that. And do I have a terminal on this machine? Yes. And I'm going to Control-Shift-V. And the path to my JSON file is going to be the squiggly line for home directory, downloads, and then let's see what that key was called. Well, it should be Kestra. Oh, you know what? I am on a VM, so let me go ahead and I'm going to open that up. I'm going to copy the contents. Let me switch back to this VM. Control-C, nano, GCP key. On your computer, if you're not using VMs like I am, you could have just given it the path to where that JSON key was in your downloads folder, and that would have worked. I made it a little more complicated here, so I'm just saving that into a file called GCP key. And here I just need to cat GCP key Oh, I named it wrong. Let me do a rename real quick. Otherwise, that will drive me crazy. Okay, there it is. And now I forgot the command, JQ, and that's going to be at JSON. Okay, and we just need to install that real quick. Put in our password. And while that's going, I'm going to switch back here. And in the documentation, it has us put in the bucket name, the project name, and then the string we're about to get. So let's go ahead and create that bucket. So cloud storage buckets. I'm going to create a bucket. Kestra data. Although I guess that's a little bit confusing because I named the database the same thing. So the database is going to have information about the flows, triggers, things like that. This is going to be the actual files and data that the orchestrator works with. So sorry if there's any confusion there, but I'm not that great at naming things. A standard class is fine. Uniform enforcement. Don't need versioning. So we'll just go ahead and create that and confirm. Okay. And there is the string that we need. There's our project name. Let me grab that real quick, probably. And if we switch back here, well, we don't need that storage anymore. So we can get rid of that volume. Let me just, Kestra storage is what we want to edit. So there we go. So the storage is going to be, is it GCS? And we can take this out and GCS. And bucket is Kestra data. Just make sure that. Okay. It's actually a little bit surprising, just because bucket names do need to be unique globally, and so no one else has the bucket Kestra data. Something I find interesting. And we do need double quotes here and a space between that colon. And I believe this was project. And then we need service account, lowercase s, capital A, and all of this. And actually, believe I don't need these double quotes because they're already included in the string. Control-Shift-V is going to paste that. Control-S to save it. And all looks good. All right. It looks like we're finally ready to bring all of this up. So I am going to, in a terminal, you could just do, one that's connected to your instance. You just do a Docker compose up -D if you don't want to see the output. I like doing that in Visual Studio Code, so I'm going to hit Control, the tick mark under the escape key to give me a terminal, and Docker compose up with no -D because line 15 did not find expected key. So sometimes it doesn't like blank spaces there. I hope that was the case. Let's see. This down a little bit. So line 14. Oh, I left all this in for the for Postgres. And so the way this works, I'll Control Z just so we can see that, is it reads like services. Okay, Kestra. Okay, these go to Kestra, which is a service. These are kind of orphaned here because they were under Postgres, and I just did not remove those. So I believe that was the issue. We'll find out in a moment here. We'll try again. First time pulling Kestra, the Docker image, is going to take a moment. So just kind of let that spin. Might be a good time to grab a cup of coffee or tea, have a little stretch, and we'll pick back up as soon as that's done. Okay, now that that's done, doesn't look like we got any errors. What we can do now is we can go ahead and go back to our VMs here and get that IP address. Let's see. I want compute engine VM instances. Just grab that. Port 8080. We get username and password. If you've got a bad memory like me, you can switch back here. It is hard-coded in the Docker Compose file. When we look here, we want our email that we gave it. In my case, my super secure password of Kestra123. And we do have Kestra running. One quick thing, I'm going to change this to dark mode. This tends to look a little bit better to me. Personal preference. Okay. And we can go to blueprints. And the best way to, or maybe just the quickest way, what can I say? I'm a little bit lazy. Download CSV. Okay, they do have a demo here. So I'm just going to, actually, the nice thing about Kestra, we're in blueprints here, which if you're not familiar, you can go through and they've got a lot of examples. So if you're looking to work with S3 or SQL, or in our case, GCP, you can find a lot of easy to use kind of boilerplate flow stuff. Just makes it nice to use. But going back to download here, yes, I'm just going to go ahead and use that. I will skip the tour. I'm going to just go ahead and download that file, and I will save it. And if we switch back here to our cloud storage and buckets, I think I missed clicking that. And we go in here. You see there's nothing in our bucket. Well, that'll change in a moment. In theory, if we go ahead and execute, and we can just execute to test, it should be a quick download. If we look here, I completed. And now if we refresh, and we can just follow this down, that would be the namespace, the name of the flow, the executions, and all the way down to the CSV. Okay, so if you're running Kestra just in Docker Compose, it automatically cleans up these files when the task completes, or if you use a working directory, which is beyond the scope of this video, it cleans those up for us. But with Google Cloud Storage, we do need to do a little cleanup ourselves, which isn't too bad. We just need to do a purge, which let me just Google Kestra purge. And let's see. This purges the executions, logs, metrics, and storage files. Now what we just want to purge the execution. So I believe we can just copy this. And let me switch back. There we go. And actually, let me go all the way back up here. And I'm going to delete all of that. Okay. Now let me switch back. I'll go to flows. Make that a little bigger. Open that in editor. We do need to line that up. Give it a little tick in front there. There we go. You know what? I'm just going to, purge execution is probably descriptive enough. I'm just going to call this cleanup. Go ahead and Control S to save that. Successfully saved. And in this flow, it has two tasks. One is to download the CSV, and then the other one is to purge execution. I just saved it, so now I should be able to execute and execute while that's running. I don't know if I'm quick enough to see those files listed here. And I think that run ended. Yes. So the cleanup, I guess what we could do is outputs. And if you look at the URI, you could have used that. If you're not in the working directory, you could have used the URI to grab those files, use them in subsequent tasks, and then done the purge at the very end. Just be aware, if you don't want those files kind of hanging out there dangling in your Google Cloud storage, you will need to add that purge at the end. Okay, now time for the cleanup. So, really, there's only two things we made, or three if you count Google Cloud Storage, but that's not really going to run you any money. But we should probably start with bringing Kestra itself down. Not really necessary, but here I'm just going to Control C. If you ran that with a -D, you just need to be in the same directory and do Docker compose down. And that does a little bit of cleanup as well. So back here, we just need to go to our buckets and we can delete that. Again, this is probably the least important of the three. If we go back to SQL, let's see here. I think that's over here. We can go ahead and delete. Again, we can delete because we do not have data protection enabled. If we did, we would need to first stop the instance, edit it, turn that off, and then we could delete it. All right, that is deleting. It will take a little bit of time. And then the VM instance. and we can just straight delete that. All right. And that should be it for the cleanup. So again, what we did, you could have just ran the Kestra Docker Compose file as is on your VM, but the data about your flows and all the kind of Kestra data that runs the orchestrator is going to be in a different container on your VM. And then the data storage for downloading files and things like that is going to be in a Docker volume. Doing it this way, you have, well, the infinite space of Google Cloud Storage, and you do have uh, a big safeguard there by having it in the SQL instance. So uh, if something happened to your VM, that data is safe over in Cloud SQL. So where to go from here? Well, you could play around, schedule tasks, things like that. You could spin up other resources from Kestra. If you want to save some money, you could also look at timed instances where you schedule your VM and your Cloud SQL to come up at a certain point. Make sure your flows are all scheduled in that window. They run, and then Cloud SQL and the VM are shut down again. And as you saw, it really doesn't cost a whole lot. If you were actually not during the free trial period and just followed along, this would probably cost you less than 25 cents, USD. And it's just a nice way to, well, learn both GCP and Kestra at the same time. So hopefully you all enjoyed, got something out of this, and I will see you in another video.